In this video, we will learn Java arrays. So, in Java, arrays are basically the object. So, whatever an array will hold, array itself is an object on the heap. It is the size is fixed. Whenever we declare an array in the Java, whenever we initialize an array in the Java, it has a fixed size. So, if we initialized an array of size 6, the size will remain fixed. It's not going to change. If you want to change the size, you need to create a new array in Java. And an array is basically a homogeneous collection of objects. It means that if we have to store like 6 integers, so the type is integer, then we can use an array to store 6 integers. For example, if we have to store 10 employees, then again the type is common, which is employee, and we can create an array to store 10 employee objects. But we cannot create an array to store, let's say, 5 integers, 1 boolean, and 3 objects. So this is not possible in Java. It is a homogeneous collection. Homogeneous collection means the type of the elements must be same and the size is fixed once it's initialized, and array itself is an object. So let's see how to declare an array in Java. In Java, to declare an array, we give the type name, then square brackets, then name of the variable. So let's say if we have to declare an array of type integer, an integer array basically, so we will write something like this: int square brackets and name of the variable, let's say my int array. If we have to, for example, if we have to create an array to store objects, for example employee, then we would say employee square brackets and name of the variable, employee array. So this array will hold integer values and this array will store employee objects. But array itself is an object. So whenever we initialize an array itself will be an object on the heap, and each location of that array will hold a value. If we have created, for example, in this case, each location would store a primitive value, but in this case each location would store the employee object basically. So moving on, how do we define the size of the array? So in Java there are a couple of ways to initialize an array, and we will see them in practical, but for now let's focus on a single way. So let's say if I have to create an integer array, then we will say something like this. So this is going to initialize an array of type integer. The name of the variable is a and the size is 7. So this is how we declare and initialize an array in Java. One more thing, just like any other language, in Java indexes are 0 based. So index starts from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So in this case, if we have defined the size as 7, then the index would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is an array in Java. Now let's say we have a new array, b equals to new integer array of size 3. What it means is that on the heap, when this line executes, on the heap a new object will be created. A new array object will be created with size 3, index 0, 1 and 2. And this reference variable, because this is basically a reference variable, so b is pointing to it. array itself is an object, although it is defined to store the integer variable in this case, but because array is an object, so the array object will go to the heap. It will be created on the heap, and b will be a reference variable pointing to this array object. Now in case of primitives, the default value, each object or each type has a default value in Java. So in this case, because this is integer, the default values are 0. So even if we don't put anything in this array, the default value of each location, each array index would be 0. Now if we have to update the array, we would say b1 equals to 4. That means go to the first index, the first location, basically index number 1. So we are saying that 0 and 1, go to this index and update its value to 4. Now if you want to update the first location, so you have to give the index 0 because this is 0 based. So that means go to the index 0, which will be the first location, and update its value to 2. The last index, because we didn't do anything, it is int, so it will be assigned a default value of 0. Okay. Now let's take another example. So let's say we created an employee array. We have an employee object, and we are creating a new array to store employee objects. So something like this, employee, let's give the size 2. Now in this case, again on the heap, a new array object will be created with size 2. Now in case of objects, whether it is employee or any custom object or any object, any class that exists in JDK, in case of an object array, the default value is null, because in this case the array will hold the objects of employee class, and so this is basically a reference variable indirectly, and because we have not initialized it, by default the reference variables are assigned a null value. It means it's not pointing to any object. Now let's initialize it. Let's say we give it a new employee value. I'm sorry, just a second. So let's create a new employee first. Employee, let's name it obj1 equals to new employee, and let's say it has a single id attribute, id value of type integer, and let's give it value 101. Now when we say e0 equals to obj1, it means we are saying that first create a new object on the heap, employee1, so this is the reference variable obj1, it is pointing to this object, and then we are saying that e0 store this reference variable to e0, which is the first location. So this is something like that, like it. So the 0th location will kind of have a reference variable pointing to this object. Similarly, if we have another object, let's say of employee obj2, and if we assign it to location 1, then it will have a similar reference variable pointing to that object. So that's how object arrays behave in Java. Array itself is an object, and if we create a new object and assign it to one of the array locations, then what essentially that array location stores is basically a reference variable, a link to that object. It doesn't hold the object, but a link to that object. Now let's do something else. In the same example, if we say e dot 0 dot id equals to 102. First of all, is this a valid statement? Yes, because we assigned the obj reference variable to e0. So e0 is basically because the type is employee, so e0 basically holds a reference variable of type employee and it is pointing to this particular object. So e0 and obj1 are equivalent, so whatever we can do with obj1 we can do the same with e0. So we are saying that get the object assigned by this reference variable, get its id property and update the value to 102. So earlier the value was 101, but now it becomes 102, and this reference variable is pointing to this object, and so does this reference variable. So now if we try to access the id value by obj1 dot id, we get the same value. So this is nothing but the basics of reference variables, and the only thing is we are now doing it via arrays. So just to summarize, in Java we declare an array with type and square brackets. We declare primitive arrays with type and square bracket. We can also create object arrays. Arrays are zero index based, and whenever we create a new object, it is created, the corresponding array object is created on the heap. By default, for primitive type of array, the values are 0, or if, let's say if it's boolean, then it will be false. It depends on the type. In case of an object, by default the array values are null, but when we initialize an object and assign it to one of the array locations, then that behaves just like a reference variable pointing to some object on the heap. So whatever changes we do in that object via the reference variable, it will impact all the reference variables pointing to the same object. So that's pretty much it on the Java arrays for now. Thank you.